you could be the hardest atheist and believe it. And regardless of whether meaning is out there or it's something you create, like probably the hardest atheist would say, yes, finding meaning, whether it's out there to be gotten or if it's something you create, like finding meaning in life. What is meaningful? What is this about? What can we choose to make life about? That's going to make life worth living.
Yeah.
Those are things that the hardest atheist would say, yeah, that's a good thing, how you'd be better off having those things than not having those things.
Correct. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome aboard the Max Afterburner podcast, sponsored, powered, brought to you by the No Fallen Heroes universe, man. I am completely thrilled, honored to have our guest today, Dr. Matthew Johnson. And let me just remind people that the word Matthew means gift from God. So you got, you're doubled up on this podcast today with two gifts from God. But literally, Dr. Johnson is the 500-pound head in the psychedelic space. Doc and I met almost 2 years ago.
Yeah,
I think. Almost 2 years ago. Doc and I were up in D.C., with Tim Ferris, Rick Doblin, good group of great Americans, and knocking on doors and trying to change some minds in D.C. But let me read you this real quick because I don't want to miss any of this stuff. So Doc is a professor of psychiatry and behavioral science, formerly of Johns Hopkins. He's one of the world's most published scientists on the human effects of psychedelics and has conducted seminal research in the behavioral economics of drug use, addiction, and risk behavior. And Dr. J earned his PhD in experimental psychology at UVM, University of Vermont. Right. My oldest son, Matthew, went to Norwich. So we'd spend a lot of time up there, and he actually played club hockey against UVM. So beautiful school.
Oh, yeah. That was the thing, hockey.
Oh, hockey, man. Exactly.
I love some of the sweatshirts for UVM, University of Vermont, undefeated in football since 1970, whatever it was. That's when they got rid of their football team. It was all about hockey.
It is 100% hockey, man. Working with psychedelics since 2004, Dr. J published psychedelic safety guidelines in 2008, helping to resurrect psychedelic research right at the right time. As principal investigator, he developed and published the first research on psychedelic treatment of tobacco addiction in 2014, and the results were insane. 80% of participants couldn't even look at a cigarette at the 6-month point, which is just an unprecedented success rate. We're going to talk about my ibogaine and alcohol thing once we dig into it. Finally, Dr. J and his colleagues published the largest study on psilocybin in treating cancer distress in 2016. Many of you who saw How to Change Your Mind, very familiar with Dr. J, and we'll talk about his former wingman there, Roland Griffiths. But the 2018 psilocybin abuse liability review recommended replacement in Schedule 3 upon potential medical approval. And we're going to dig into all this stuff. Principal investigator on funded studies investigating psilocybin in the treatment of opioid dependence and PTSD. Does a lot more outside of psilocybin. Looked at cocaine, sex desire, sex decision-making, and then Dr. J's been all over the media, man. Anderson Cooper, How to Change Your Mind, all good stuff there. So, Doc, welcome aboard, man. Again, it's great to be in your presence, and looking forward to getting airborne.
No, it's an honor to be with you and to be asked to do this with you. Thank you.
You bet, man. So, our wires got crossed a couple of weeks ago. I was trying to get Doc on. God's awesome because he provided a 2-week or whatever it was delay, because we're going to dive right into this because you're the perfect guy to talk to about this. So MDMA getting ready to be hopefully rescheduled for therapeutic in use in August. ICER came out. It's allegedly it's a nonprofit that kind of is a consigliere to the insurance industry about drugs and stuff like that. But they came out and shots fired across the bow of Lycos and MAPS and Rick Doblin and the study, right? And I need to pick your brain on studies. And I'm glad we had a little bit of a delay because I think early this week, some trialists and some docs and folks in that kind of fired back at ICER. So
right, and I took a quick look at that. Yeah.
Oh, good. Mm-hmm. All right. So we're going to dig into
at the response you're referring to. Yeah.
Good. So let's start with this, Doc, because of all your studies, tell me about a study and bias. How you and I, my brother, we're humans. There's a perfect soul in here somewhere under this ego, but let's talk about studies in general and bias and how, as a 500-pound head, bias impacts anything in a study.
Yeah, there's always some degree of bias, and it depends on what type of bias you're talking about. In any therapeutic research, I hope the bias is that you want the person to get better. Like it's not impartial. I mean, we don't want to be impartial in all ways. I mean, because if you don't want the person to get better, no matter what group they're in, no matter what, condition, then you're not delivering good therapy. So, but you do what you can in research studies to eliminate inappropriate bias.
Okay.
So let's say particular, enthusiasm for the treatment that's being tested. And you do that through various ways. There's the classic thing is the double blind, like study to try to control for expectancy effects, so if it's just, we don't want snake oil, and so people might not be familiar with that. The reason we say snake oil means just some bullshit that's being marketed that doesn't have a real effect. I mean, literally more than 100 years ago. That's why, before we had an FDA, people, these people would take their wagon hauled by their, horse, whatever, to different towns, and they would literally sell snake oil or whatever,
elixirs
thing, and they'd sell it to people that were, people would spend their life fortunes on because their kid has cancer, and you don't know what to believe. It's like this guy says it's healed all these people, and it's of course you're going to spend all your money on this. What might be absolutely nothing. And so, that's why we have an FDA. We don't want people selling, garbage. We don't, and their standards are safety and efficacy. So, and that's evolved over time. It was really the thalidomide scandal in the 60s that led to the real, an emphasis on the safety. So it's got to work, and it can't cause harm. Now, everything's going to have some degree of risk, but it's all about risk-benefit ratio. What are those risks? Are people informed of them? And so, we have things like the double blind in place. We have things and I always remind people there's no such thing as a perfect experiment. No matter what, you do an experiment, you could have done it in a different way, and that different way could be better in this respect, but the trade-off is it's not as good in that respect. In that sense, it's I think of Thomas Sowell politically. It's there's no such thing as solutions, there's trade-offs.
Yes.
It's that applies to science. There's there's always pluses and minuses, and ultimately it takes a human being to triangulate across different research methods. And we're not good. Until AI takes over completely, and we've got maybe a year or two before, until then, it's going to take a human being with common sense and wisdom, with familiarity with the different approaches to look at those different ways to do research. So, psychedelic research has been critiqued about what's not possible to fully blind.
Yeah.
But even that, and by blind, I mean, the double blind trial is where neither the treatment staff nor the patient knows whether they're getting the real deal, like the psychedelic, or the placebo or comparison compound. But that's a complex thing, because one of the things I always remind people is that it's pretty common for individuals, for patients, to cut through the blind outside of psychedelics.
Correct.
Psychedelic research. So especially in mental health care, where so many of the treatments are psychoactive.
Correct.
Be it antidepressants, people could tell by the way they feel that they're on it. Certainly the anxiolytics, the various benzos and Xanax, et cetera, the sleep medications, obviously pain analgesics, any sort of psychoactive drug, which is the mainstay in mental health treatment, they have telltale effects, that people can cut through those. So sometimes in some sense, psychedelics aren't that special. So it's important to remind people. It's not that like we shouldn't be concerned with the whole issue of cutting through the blind, but it's still, there is still some value in maintaining the blind, even if most people correctly guess, because at least you're not, the person might have a guess, but if the treatment provider doesn't know ultimately what treatment they were in, they might have their guess.
True.
But if you actually know, then there can be an echo chamber where you amplify that signal, even if there's some sort of signal where someone has a guess, oh, it feels like I got the real thing. At least that's not kind of exaggerated through this kind of echo chamber of like interaction with staff who knows what they were on.
So there's a certain, I'll use a scientific aviation term, there's a certain amount of slop. We're humans, there's a certain amount of biases. So that's one issue in studies. But to your point, and as I was doing my research before our talk, I like these words: psychedelic naive volunteers. Even if you've never heard of MDMA, for example, before, but you're depressed, you see an ad, this is how old I am. You see an ad in the paper that says, hey, are you depressed? Sign up for this study. The internet exists, right? You're going to Google what is MDMA and what's it feel like, right? So, within an hour of sitting in a scientific room after taking what you thought was MDMA or not MDMA, you're going to know, right? So how is it physically possible on this planet to find somebody who is a, quote, psychedelic naive volunteer? When I read the ICER report, first of all, I read all Rick's stuff and the MAP stuff, and I was blown away by the phase 3 results. Me, my brother, trying to put the ladder down to help veterans with PTS, man. And if those results are to be believed, holy shit, man, we're losing 22 to 44. It's like, why didn't we do this 5 years ago? Let's go. Let's get going. You saw me talking to lawmakers, man. I'm like, what are we doing? So I loved all that stuff. Then I read the ICER stuff and I'm like, oh shit, man. But then as I dug into some of their bullets that they fired, I'm like, well, is some of this stuff, well, let me get out of your way. You've read clearly all the MAP stuff. You read the ICER stuff and it sounds like you just read some of the shots fired back. Pretend you're Switzerland right now, if you can. Give us the landscape on MDMA. What's Dr. J's forecast for August? Does the FDA read all this stuff and go, oh boy, this is bad? Or what's your take on the crossfire between ICER and the folks that fired back? And just the MAPS trials, if you can. Right.
My best guess is that the FDA is going to approve MDMA.
Okay. Schedule 3, right? That is what you'd think they do.
Yeah, I have less of and this isn't where my expertise is on the policy side.
Sure.
Though I try my best. Unfortunately, I think they're probably going to come up with what's called a bifurcated schedule, which is essentially what's happened with a drug some people might have heard of it called GHB. It was kind of popular in the 90s in the rave scene, but it's actually a really, really great sleep drug that's used to treat narcolepsy associated with cataplexy associated with narcolepsy. So people that involuntarily fall asleep during the day, it's a great treatment for that because it gives you really, really good deep sleep at night. It actually showed really good efficacy for treating fibromyalgia, which is about 2% of American women, but it ultimately failed not because of the efficacy and safety, but because of kind of an anti-drug backlash. A woman whose son had unfortunately died of abusing in a rave setting GHB. It ended up not going forward. But I bring that up because GHB was approved with a bifurcated schedule. It was not for fibromyalgia. It was approved for this cataplexy indication. Meaning, it's a fancy word, bifurcated. It means if you're caught with it on the street, it's still Schedule 1.
Oh.
If it's for treatment, it's another schedule, and I forget, it's 3 or 4.
Okay.
And in a way, cannabis is the same thing, because if it's like federally approved Marinol, which is the active agent, the primary active agent in cannabis, it's Schedule, and again, I'm forgetting, it's 3 or 4. It was 2, but I think it's maybe 3 now. But if it's whole plant cannabis, it's Schedule 1. Although I just read the news literally, I think yesterday, that the DEA is finally going to shift that to, I think, Schedule 3, or they're planning to. So these are bifurcated schedule, which is really a bastardization of the Controlled Substances Act, what everyone thinks about that.
Yeah.
The 1970 Controlled Substances Act. It says, this compound or plant, here's what we know about it scientifically, and here's how we're going to classify it based on two dimensions of whether it's has medical efficacy and on its abuse potential. So, illicit cocaine is not Schedule 1 because it's illicit. It's still Schedule 2.
Correct.
So it's weird, like a lot of things in government, like, how like war is declared, like there's this, like, it's more precedent than the original intention of the law.
Correct.
And the more precedent happens, the more that becomes just the way things are done, and no one complains about it. It's like we're back in the day, people like bent over backwards said, well, Vietnam's not a war, it's a military action back started in Korea. And it's like,
police
now,
action.
like, we don't even it's a war. It's
correct.
It sounds ridiculous to this isn't a war. So similar thing, like it bastardizes the intention of the Controlled Substances Act, but there's a decent chance MDMA will be the same way. So it'll be a bifurcated schedule. So unfortunately, illicit MDMA won't be rescheduled, which I think it should. And I'm not saying, MDMA should be sold in 7-Elevens. That's another conversation about the appropriate level of regulation for drugs and decriminalization and all of this. But it's probably, my understanding, it's probably likely going to be bifurcated in that sense.
Wow. This is the first I'm hearing about this. I didn't, that's an SAT word I needed to probably look up, but I'm glad you explained it. Bifurcated. I thought they'd go the ketamine route of like, hey, it's Schedule 3, but this is starting to make a little bit more sense. I don't. It's
a kind of like a political compromise. Like, well, we're not saying.
Yeah.
Because it's like almost, even if you just move to Schedule 2, it's almost like, well, we're being soft on drugs. It's like, well, no.
Yeah.
You don't want to get caught with cocaine.
Correct.
A lot of trouble if you're caught with,
correct,
a Schedule 2 or even a Schedule 3 drug, and you're not supposed to have it. Like, but almost it's like, well, it sends the wrong message if we. Yeah. So it's this really unfortunate political compromise where, like, if it's on the street, we're gonna call it Schedule 1. It's like really, really bad. But if it's
in a clinic,
but again, that's not the way we had treated opioids and cocaine and methamphetamine. And,
correct.
Yeah.
Well, and it's I almost travel around with this. I should have this stapled to my
from David Nutt's research. Yeah, I could tell.
Yeah, the harm scale or whatever the scale is. It's alcohol, tobacco, cocaine, heroin, psilocybin, MDMA, and it's harm to yourself and harm to others. You know me, man. I if the definition of Schedule 1 drug is no therapeutic use and high risk of addiction, that's the exact that's the definition of alcohol and a cigarette. It's the exact opposite definition of ibogaine. It was the most therapeutic thing I've ever done in my life, and being a bad drinker, I couldn't even look at booze 8 months after I got home from ibogaine. It made me ill to smell alcohol. Now I can have a glass of wine with my steak, but old me, a glass of wine was a bottle or two, and it destroyed that. So it's typical government. We're going to label something the exact opposite of what it is. So,
and I'm willing to bet you probably aren't thinking, oh man, it'd be fun just to have a party on like ibogaine.
Oh my God, no, man. It was a 12 to 14.
Having your soul shredded, like, right.
Dude, it was a 12 to 14 hour ass kicking, man. And it was the best ass kicking I've had in my life, but it was not recreational. It wasn't pleasant. I think one of the biggest decisions I made in my life was like at the 10-hour point, rolling on my side. And it took like an hour to do it, So,
roll over.
Yeah. It was like a super tanker turning. It took a lot. But let's get back to the ICER shots fired, shots back, because like one of their shots fired was like, one of the research did something inappropriate on MDMA. It's a heart opener, man. I mean, this is so, and let's also get into the spirituality thing, because, I have the New York Times article, with your old wingman, Dr. Griffiths. Talk to us about the spirituality thing kind of either seeping in. Was it always there? Has it seeped in recently? And let me, before you start answering, my story, lost a sister to a drunk driver, some sexual trauma as a child, military trauma. Ain't no God, man. I was an altar boy, Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, we made the Pope look Jewish. And after all these things, I'm like, there ain't no God. I mean, what type of God does this? And then preparing for my ibogaine, there was no, my guide, Cynthia, never kind of brought that up. She just kind of asked, like, where are you? I'm like, doesn't exist type of thing. All right. Well, she kind of held space with that kind of opinion. And then, dude, for 12 to 14 hours, I was with a big white light of energy, love, and everything that forgave me and ripped the alcohol out of my system. I got off of that. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, man, sorry about that. And I found my faith again. So I wasn't kind of steered into that. And I'll let you know, Doc, that I've had people couldn't be more atheist or agnostic, whatever the word would be. And they get off of a psilocybin or ibogaine treatment. They'll be like, I'm still not going to call it God. I'm like, dude, I didn't say anything. But they're like, there's something, larger than us, creator, divine, truth, universe, whatever word you want to use. So talk to us about Roland too, because when I saw this article and I kind of heard what was going on, I felt like it was mom and dad. If mom and dad are fighting in front of you as a kid, you're like, oh my God, I feel so sad. Talk to us about the spirituality around all this stuff and it impacting results, good, bad, others. So help us out with some of your issues you had, at Johns Hopkins with that. I hate saying stuff, but with that stuff seeping in, because I think it was also in the ICER thing. Like some respondents are like, "Hey, the researcher asked me how was the experience," and I said it was awesome. Would you say it was religious or spiritual? Well, maybe. Okay, well, let's say that you said that. So talk to us about that, because I know you're kind of you want to be Switzerland, but how is this seeping into this? And is that bad or is that good, or can we make it a neutral?
Yeah, and this has been evolved for me over the years, but I've sort of landed in the position I'm at probably a decade ago. I mean, which was 10 years in or so, from doing this work. But it's become increasingly clear to me that to appropriately deal with these substances in mental health care. And to be clear, I would never presume to tell the various religions, the Native American Church, the Santo Daime, UDV, et cetera, what to do. Or really, and I would never tell any individual how to interpret things. My take is that it's critical that we not color these metaphysical questions for people, which is absolutely not to say, and this is one of those things that it's difficult to get into because it's so easily mischaracterized. You're just saying you want white lab coats and you're imposing materialism. Mm-hmm. Absolutely not. Mm-hmm. Absolutely not. What I've seen in the field, and I'll speak generally, what I've seen in the field is a lot of coloring in for people about what stepping into the role of priest or guru. Mm-hmm. Even around the edge, what might not seem like kind of a hard stance, but around the edges, even introducing the perennial philosophy, which is a term that was used by Aldous Huxley and has become and it's a debate in the science, the scholarship of religion, this idea that all of the world's faiths point to a core truth, and they're all getting the different aspects of the elephant that are described differently by the various blind men, because one has to be touching the tail, one touching the ear, etc.
Yes.
Debated. Most scholars of religion don't buy into it. My take is you could address that at the academic level or the personal philosophy level, but just the belief that all the religions point to some core truth and that are connected or different aspects to orient towards the divine. I could have my own personal opinions on that. I think there may be some truth to that. My personal take is in these realms, like language completely falls apart.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah. But
I feel embarrassed
pushing
trying to
it.
explain it. Another SAT word I didn't think I'd use today. Use bifurcated. I had to learn the word ineffable.
Ineffable.
I feel stupid trying to explain what I experienced.
So yeah, ineffable meaning you can't describe it. But of course, as scientists, we try to get people to describe it. So we F up the ineffable. We're going to have to F it up by saying, please describe it as much as possible.
Make it effable.
Yeah. No matter what it is, we can F it up.
Yes.
But the idea that my take is that from a mental health treatment perspective, we shouldn't be, like say at a practical level, filling the room with Buddhas and Hindu statues and crucifix and these various things, which unfortunately, in my view, has become commonplace in a lot of psychedelic research. At the same time, I say BYOB, bring your own Buddha or, crucifix or dream catcher, plant spirit, like whatever, or nothing. Or I wrote a commentary about this, and the journal required some original art, which was a unique requirement. But I drew to drive home this point, the flying spaghetti monster. So you could bring your flying spaghetti monster. For those not familiar, that became kind of the satirical, like if we're going to teach religion in schools, what about this flying spaghetti monster? A bunch of atheists said, well, I believe in this flying. You can't prove that the flying spaghetti monster doesn't exist. And so that can be called themselves pastafarians. But
true.
None of the above, because my take is like, even though most people I eat at a Thai restaurant, I'm totally chill with the Buddha there. In fact, it seems like a very pleasant, calming thing. That's fine. But in a secular setting where you want to kind of create this warm environment where all are welcome.
Yeah,
I've seen this stuff help so many people, including the least likely people that you would think would be into psychedelics.
Yes.
The people that would never touch an illicit drugs, police officers,
Navy fighter pilots,
men,
Navy SEALs, cops, firemen,
right. Wherever someone, political conservatives, someone who would never, grandmas, a lot of grandmas, especially in the cancer work I did with colleagues, just people that would never touch, and so in the same spirit, this could help, people of. It's not for everyone. We could talk about that, but people, I don't care if you're a Richard Dawkins style atheist, you're a Muslim, you're a more fundamentalist Christian who might look at some of this stuff and say, that's not of me. That's not for me. That's of the devil. That's like some other faith. And it's like, why are we creating these barriers for people? Like my colleague Peter Hendricks in Alabama, like most of his people are Bible believing, traditional Christians, and tends to have more, Jesus experiences, and that's great, but there's no kind of direction or pushing it in that direction. So I see this tendency of wanting to have a new age vibe, and nothing against new age, but I
get it.
People know what I mean when I say that, like, and the introducing to participants of, it sounds like you had have you heard of Kundalini? It sounds like you had a Kundalini experience.
Exactly.
And I think if someone brings up Kundalini, it's
great.
It's just like if someone said, I think Jesus spoke to my heart. We can confirm nor deny. That's not your job. Your job is to provide that solid support, use reflective listening. What does that mean for you? Like, I can't tell you whether Kundalini or Jesus or, as a scientist or as a psychologist, I can't tell you the ground truth of any of this. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, this is all like, was it Big Lebowski? That's just your opinion, man. Like, we all have our opinion. And I think we need to humble ourselves and say, look, I can tell you we know some about how it works in the brain. We seem to know something about how this is best done, like creating a comfortable environment, really having a good connection with the people. Like, look, I'm here for you. Hold my hand. We're a team. We're going to get through this. Like, I'm not leaving you. Encourage them to face whatever is happening. You can have the strongest rapport as possible without coloring it for them, because not always, but people often, given the nature of these experiences, have a religious, or if not nominally religious, a spiritual, and that can mean different things, because that can entail the supernatural, or it could be the things that Richard Dawkins would say is great. I feel at I feel connected to my family, to my community, to the rest of humanity.
Or
I
Earth,
feel like,
or the just Mother Nature, for lack of a better word.
Right. Like you're part of however you conceptualize, at least as part of like this, like extremely complex ecosystem. You're part of this planet with these countless species and this one species that is remarkable. Like, you could be the hardest atheist and believe it. And regardless of whether meaning is out there or it's something you create, like probably the hardest atheist would say, yes, finding meaning, whether it's out there to be gotten or if it's something you create, like finding meaning in life. What is meaningful? What is this about? What can we choose to make life about? That's going to make life worth living.
Yeah.
Those are things that the hardest atheist would say, yeah, that's a good thing. How you'd be better off having those things than not having those things.
Correct.
And so, I don't want to set up an environment where, again, if someone's a Muslim or a hard atheist or a traditional Christian or I could go on and on, but that it makes the point. Like, I think we need to meet people where they're at and not color.
Amen.
And I think it's, and even when it comes to questions like the perennial philosophy, it's an interesting experience if someone comes out and they says, oh, I part of my vision, what my experience was that these different religions are connected. And now they could still be influenced by the various things that they've heard in the world and,
of course,
and, memes that are out there. But relatively speaking, that's a more interesting observation to hear from someone scientifically than if we had the room filled with different religious symbols.
Correct.
Then that's just an echo chamber.
Exactly.
And I often think of like Stan Grof's work, and Stan Grof seems like an incredibly gifted therapist. He has countless people that says, I have no doubt, he just seemed like a therapist, like a very gifted but his whole thing was the lens through which he saw things was like so much of human psychology was about birth trauma.
Yeah.
And so much of the LSD sessions was like birth trauma. And in his work, so many of the experiences were birth trauma.
Correct.
I think it seems pretty clear, including from some of his contemporaneous colleagues, that Stan got a lot of birth trauma because that was his gig, and he would introduce this framework to people.
Correct.
And even if there's not a ground truth there, like I'm sure someone can have experiences that is colored with this framework of birth trauma, and it could be very helpful for them. But we had to be very, very careful. It's like that doesn't, I don't think we've shown or could say scientifically at a credible level that psychedelics work primarily by having people relive birth trauma and address the issues that happened during the birth process, which it might sound extreme, but that was really, I don't think I'm mischaracterizing, and I've read plenty of his original work. That was a huge part of what he thought was going on. So I think it's just very, my take is that we have to be very principled about, like, we're just here neither to confirm nor deny like anything at these metaphysical levels, because we're all in the same category of it's just your opinion, man.
Exactly.
And I can have my opinion, and that's not where your expertise is. But there's this real temptation of filling in those holes for people.
Precisely. Yeah.
And I tell you what, having been in dozens of these sessions as a guide, as someone in the room, it's pretty heavy being in there when, not always, but often, frequently people will say, this was one of the most important things that's ever happened to me as a human being. That comes with an incredible responsibility and burden. And it's really, really easy to kind of set yourself up in terms of giving the answers to this level of questions. Yeah. Whereas I really think it should be like, when those things come and say, hey, I don't know, what do you think? But I'm here for you.
Yeah.
It's you're not telling them to shut up and not talk about that stuff. It's just like, I'm not providing the answers at those levels. Yeah. And you can talk to your priest or to other, whatever faith you happen to be in, about those things, and you can talk about it with me, but I'm not going to lead you in that direction and answer those questions for you.
There's a book actually called The Art of Holding Space, right? And it's one of the easiest jobs in the world, but it's also the hardest. The easiest part is, dude, you ain't there to do everything you just said, to kind of steer guy. You're there to hold space, man, and maybe to help and do a bunch of other things. And this is important,
right?
Because I use the analogy of a bridge. I sometimes avoid telling people about my medicine experiences because it's physically impossible they're going to have the same thing or even remotely similar, right? So I'm like, because I don't want it to color people, but I tell people about it because anecdotally it helps save my life. Now, I use the analogy of a bridge. Here's a bridge of a bunch of veterans and everybody saying this stuff saved and changed my life. And on the other side of the bridge are the lab coats, the beakers, and the booger eaters. And we, in order to enact change in DC or the FDA, to your point, worried about safety and efficacy, they need data. They need just the facts, man. So it's almost like this bridge really has to meet of all the anecdotal stuff. Hey, man, this is what it did to me, and this. And it has to be as clean as possible, because it appears to me that you're one of the first guys in the past 20 years to blow the dust off the 60s and 70s research and say, let's try this again, but like really, really scientific. We don't want to goon it up again. Since you've put up the bat signal and said, hey, man, a little bit of this new age, stuff is seeping into stuff, have you seen... has it come back to kind of like, okay, good point, let's kind of clean our shit up here? Or is it, where are you after kind of raising the alarm a little bit? Or
I've gotten a lot of feedback of folks saying, yeah, thank you. Because I've been saying, people say, okay, I've been thinking this for years and it's been good. It's been concerning to me. But it's never been articulated, because also the backdrop is there's this feeling like, oh, we're fighting against this marginalization, just like, please take psychedelics seriously. Please, don't view it from just this anti-drug war, anti-drug, drug war lens. And, this requires nuance, like most things, important things in life. And it's like, so there's always some concern that if you critique these things about the research, that you're trying to prevent the research from going forward.
Exactly.
But from the other lens, it's like, no, I can actually see some of the pitfalls of the 60s repeating themselves. And I think it's going to get worse. Like, we're going to see like cults spring up. We're going to see charismatic figures. I bring up the example of like Charles Manson really did use LSD to brainwash people.
Absolutely.
And yes, it was complex, and those were kind of the type of people who would join a cult. But it seems very convincing to me that LSD was a heavy hitter. And my guess is he probably wouldn't have been able to get them at that level of committing those murders.
I mean, the last thing we need right now is somebody else running around going, hey, let's put it in the water. I mean, I get what the spirit was behind that type of thoughts, but that freaked mom and pop the hell out. Is there Can we land on a happy medium, right? Can we fix that stuff that's going on now? Because a bunch of different companies, whether it's Atai or MindMed, are doing psilocybin studies or ibogaine studies. Do you think you or kind of the establishment has cracked the whip enough where moving forward, especially after the ICER poked some holes in what MAPS did, are we tightened? Is the ship getting watertight again? The research ship.
I think generally the companies are tending to, from my knowledge, and so I can't say there's not exceptions, but I think they're generally operating from in this framework that I'm suggesting. However, that might be in part a consequence of there's sort of this incentive because of the drug development process to kind of strip it of the psychotherapy. And then we can get into a conversation about whether there's not what I call nominal psychotherapy. I think it's ethically important to have preparation and a rapport with the person you're with.
Yeah.
And then it's an empirical, meaning a data-driven question in terms of what do you need to combine it with, like nominal CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, or motivational enhancement, or you name it, prolonged exposure therapy for PTSD. That's, because I think it's also, it seems that a lot of people that just sometimes take a psychedelic for fun, and I've done plenty of like survey work on this, they have incredible insights. And even the typical thing is you take a psychedelic for fun and you have fun. It's not their horrible, life destroying bad trip, nor is it like life-changing positive. I remind people that most kids, it's a college kid takes it, they giggle, they have fun, no harm, no foul, like in either direction. but it's surprisingly common, even if not typical, for someone just to take some acid or shrooms for fun, and they have one of these life-altering experience, and they're telling you about it 30 years later, and they're like, man, like I just realized, holy shit, I drink too much. I'm done.
Yeah.
Like, and so my take is that's their psychotherapeutic process, whether it's what I call nominal therapy. You didn't have a therapist there. You're not talking about in the black box, in the mind. It's like everything that you would want, or a good number of things that you would want for good psychotherapy. It's like radically looking at yourself from a different perspective.
Correct.
Getting outside of your normal way of looking at the world. We're so habituated. We're like the the frog, or the water has been turned up, slowly boiled, and you don't realize it. And it's like,
correct.
Then you kind of step out and you're like, holy cow, I never would have said 10 years ago I would be like drinking this. Like,
correct.
Like, and it's just like on a day-to-day basis, it's just normal. But then when you step out of it, it's like, whoa, like this is an issue. I got to course correct, because I could see myself 20 years from now doing the same thing. And it's like, it's not good.
Well,
that happens with smoking and all kinds of things.
There's a sentence I do in the medicine work now that 5 years ago would have given me a wedgie and take my lunch money, but I believe it. You are the medicine. So to your point, you can have your own psycho. And it's interesting because, Doc, I do some trading and I look at the psychedelic stocks. I think MindMed recently, I forget the company yesterday that came out. They're almost racing to come out with, by the way, ours showed these results without any talk therapy. It was almost like, I forget, maybe it was MindMed. It was almost a shot at like MDMA, like, oh, you're going to need 6 to 8 hours in a clinic. Ours was, one drop of LSD and didn't talk to anybody. And then whoever it was, I forget the company yesterday, same type of thing. Our results are this, and it's only half a day in a clinic it was also a little bit of a poke at MDMA. Like, it's half a day in a clinic as opposed to spending a whole day. So it's interesting. I think
right, and there's a market incentive for that.
Exactly.
Like, we're not going to, and I could be, I'm not familiar of everything that's going on, and some is not even public, but from what I've seen, everything has had at least some level of preparation and support during the session, even if it's
correct.
The way it's described is minimized. And then you get into these distinctions. Was it psychotherapeutic preparation or just preparation for the drug?
For the medicine.
It's the core, what's referred to in psychology as the common factors. These kind of core components that for most disorders seem to account for more variance. They explain better whether people get better or not, more so than whether the therapist is a cognitive behavioral therapist or a Freudian or a whatever type of therapist. It's like, is there a strong bond is there a trust between the therapist and the client? Exactly. Are people looking at themselves from a different perspective? Is there some sort of pathway towards growth? Like, these are, and that's going to be there just through like establishing that rapport. So we get into, it's a lot of semantics, but I would be concerned if there was no preparation and no support, like, just lock them in the padded room for like 12 hours. Like, as far as I know, that's not happening, but that's an empirical question. And I am also open to the idea of like, yes, this is a really expensive treatment model, and having something where you need a lot of psychotherapy is like, it's not going to hit as many people. And if you can help a lot more people by having an ethically, relatively minimal level of that extra, drug session interaction at some, and I don't know what the magic number is, but some reasonable level, like that's going to more easily disseminate. Yeah. And so that's good, not just for the money perspective. Like, I'm not talking about the money, but even though if that happens, it happens to be better for the money perspective.
Correct.
But it also, if it's also a cheaper model, is going to disseminate more. Yeah. It's going to be more likely that the VA and Medicare and insurance companies cover it.
True.
And so we have to be nuanced with that. We can just say, oh, these evil companies. So to me, that's all, like I said, a data-driven question, like whether you need the nominal therapy or not. But I do strongly believe there needs to be preparation and support during the session. Then we can let the results guide us. My best guess is that you can do a relatively minimal level and get a lot of, it's going to help a lot of people. I'm guessing, at least for a lot of disorders, you're going to help some larger percentage of people. Yep. If you also have that therapy, that extra, nominal psychotherapy delivered with it. But again, even that I could be wrong, because that's a question we could, let the data speak to us on. And so far, there hasn't been any study that say compared it with or without nominal therapy, and that's some work I'd like to do. So it's a nuanced, thing. This question of therapy. Yeah, but I think that I mean, the critique. There was some kernel of truth to I think a number of things that were in there, but nothing for me that would suggest that would really
alter the bottom line results.
Right. Like, yeah, there is some cutting through the blind, but it's also, we're meeting the standard that the FDA is requiring. It seems very convincing to me across different studies that this isn't snake oil. I mean, we know very well that MDMA is doing some dramatic effects in the brain. And from the mechanistic evidence, which you don't need for approval, but we happen to have, it's a very credible story that there is this acute state where people are able to reprocess trauma. There's this dampened amygdala response. There's this hormonal change, this ability to kind of reprocess the trauma from a safer psychological context. And everything we know about how memory works through consolidation, reconsolidation of memory, it makes sense that that's such a profound experience that's going to stick with people.
Amen.
As the new normal. And, whether it's getting away from self-blame and looking at them from a really suboptimal perspective to really having this more enlightened perspective that really does have more ground truth. Like, no, that really wasn't my fault. And look how resilient I actually was.
Yeah.
Like, I'm still here, and look at what I've dealt with, all of this horror and my friends and what I've seen. And like, the way I look at it, like a loved one would look at you, or just even a stranger.
Correct.
Would have this. It's like, dude, you're actually like, look at what you have done. Look how resilient you are. And look what that situation that you wouldn't want your worst enemy to be in. Yeah. Look what you've gone through. And you see that about yourself. Amen. And that is such a ground truth that people carry that with them. So everything we know about the way it works is so consistent with, and we know it's certainly, we know more about how MDMA and psilocybin work acutely than even we know about the SSRIs. The real question is like the biological mechanisms of long-term, is that all driven a long-term therapeutic efficacy? Is that all driven by placebo? I think overall the data strongly suggests no. And like I said, it's not unique amongst other treatments. They've jumped through the hoops. It doesn't mean it's just the beginning of the science, as far as I'm concerned. We still need plenty of science to optimize these treatments, but I think it passes the safety and efficacy requation of the FDA.
Yeah. I love the way you said that. I tell people, like on my ibogaine experience, I wasn't in the trauma. I was an observer of the trauma. I was it's literally like I was sitting in a movie theater with God sitting next to me. We're eating popcorn going, dude, now you see that? Now look at it, from a different, I was able to look at things from a different point of view and just kind of repackaged that trauma. So I wasn't in it, I was an observer of it.
Right.
Let's go to Roland, right? Because was there a drift? Was he? I don't want to talk like this, but straight laced. Was there a shift to the spiritualism, or how can you characterize? Because you guys were buddies, and God bless his soul, and thank you for doing all the work that he did. Describe his either drift or where you all where you stayed, for lack of a better word, in the Switzerland, in the neutral, and he kind of maybe drifted spiritual.
Yeah, and I want to be
or is
careful
that even a fair way to say any of that?
Right. I don't want to delve further into the details. I kind of want to just I'm trying not to kind of unnecessarily kind of dwell in any drama, but I'll tell you, like,
well, yeah, I don't want to talk about the drama. I just wanted to talk about the science of it, because with the with the spirituality thing seeping into the MDMA, and maybe some of what was going on at Johns Hopkins. You definitely, I'm zero a drama guy, but I was just wondering because I always looked at you two as like Maverick and Goose or Bert and Ernie in the psychedelic space. And you know, when I kind of read stuff, I'm like, oh fuck, man, what happened type of thing. These guys were Starsky and Hutch.
Yeah.
You know?
So I'll say generally I've become increasingly concerned of an ends justifies the means kind of approach to this work.
Okay.
Where it doesn't really need to be there. And in fact,
that's the point. Let the medicine, let all this speak for itself. You don't have to do this. I'm so glad you said it like that. Like, it's not needed. And if it's going to impact the mission, please don't do it. Let it go, man. It's good, you know?
Right. And there's some examples, and I would hold out Rick Doblin as a positive role model and hero, and some of his previous work. So his graduate work in public policy in the Harvard School, and he did some really interesting things. Like he interviewed these participants in the 1962, was it 63? I think 62 Good Friday study with Wally Pankey, with the seminary students having the religious experiences on psilocybin. And he uncovered that, you know, there was not one but two people that escaped from the lavatory, which was the basement of a church, Marsh Chapel in Boston and the Boston area. And, you know, one of them had to be, he heard the Good Friday service that was pumped through the service going on upstairs. And it was the mentor, I forget his, MLK's mentor. So it was like this very evocative, like, service, and they're like on psilocybin. And he got the message, we got to tell the world about the man on the cross. There's a man on the cross. And so he's like, how do I do this? It's like, well, I'm here in the Boston area. I've got to find the president of Harvard University and tell him about the man on the cross. It's like, that's the most logical thing, you know. It's like, so he was like running down, he had to be chased down. And I as I recall, like, you know, basically tackled and shot in the ass with Thorazine.
Oh my God.
You know, and
wow.
And so this wasn't originally reported. And the idea was like, things are so charged that this would make things look bad. And Rick's take was, look, this shouldn't, you know, we need to stick to the truth. And he had a similar reanalysis of the Concord prison experiment, where they went into prison and gave psilocybin sessions to these hardcore, people that commit serious, like, violent felonies and this type of thing, which I think it's promising work to look at antisocial behavior and whatever. Like, as a general lesson, we should start at the margins. Like, let's not start with murderers and rapists. Like, we could start with, like, you know, minor property crime and then go from there, you know what I mean?
Correct.
Like, but there were some, like, I guess, creative statistics from the most generous perspective, and just, you know, like the people that got psilocybin had all these interactions that the other group didn't, that wasn't originally reported. And so, you know, even back then there was this ends justifies the means kind of mentality. And so just in the field, and I'll speak generally, but just the sense that, like, oh, we need to whitewash things or to minimize, like, I got some pushback from colleagues I was on the Huberman podcast and said, hey, don't take this like it's not at all typical, but, you know, don't completely dismiss this idea that people could jump out of windows, because there are some cases where it looks like that. Like, these are really mind-altering substances, and whether it's 1 out of 1,000,000 or 1 out of 100,000, like, no one knows. But there are some cases where it looks like
there's a probability. Yeah,
like. And I mean, my take on this is like the old comedian Bill Hicks. Like, if you have that idea, like, you could test that hypothesis on the ground. Exactly. Like, it's going to work or not work, and kind of minimal damage. Like, don't start from, like, the 4th floor. But all kidding aside, I say, you know, don't take this, you know, take this despite me joking about it. Don't take this seriously.
Sure.
Because I said, seen a video of one of our sessions where someone, and it was reported, but, you know, where they were going to fly through they bumped their head. They ended up being okay. They had a little bump, but, like, it really looked like they were jumped off the couch, thinking they would fly through the painting on the wall. this abstract painting. And I think anyone who's been around psychedelics enough, not that just had 1 or 2 sessions and had, but if you've been around psychedelics enough, every once in a while,
yes,
it gets out there.
Yeah.
And if you know enough about psychedelics, it wouldn't surprise you. Like, that's not that crazy. Like, that can happen sometimes. So we've got to keep people in a safe environment. We've got to, if they're going to do something, like I read one recent thing in Oregon as part of the program. Someone said, it scared them that they were kind of near a cliff. It sounded like a beautiful setting, but they were too close to it. They were kind of lucky they didn't just accidentally,
correct.
Public intoxication is a problem with any substance, like obviously alcohol being the big example, but don't be surprised if there's accidents, minimally accidents, but more so with the psychedelics, sometimes even more than an accident. Like, you're just so far out there, you could really think, is this real?
Yeah.
Like, this is all just real. Like, it could be so compelling that this is all in the mind.
Correct.
Like, I could actually, if I believe that I could,
yes,
fly, I'm going to fly, like this type of thing. And then so I said, so I just said, I could imagine, had this been a window rather than a painting, it seems like it could have been one of those cases. So take it seriously, but just, concern from colleagues that that's inflammatory, that's going to scare people. Yes, even though that happened, that's you shouldn't be saying that stuff to people. And my take is look, we're about to unleash this on the world.
Yeah.
And, in terms, it's already out there in the world, but in terms of formal therapy, and
correct,
we just really have to let people know the truth. And sometimes it gets crazy, and you got to be prepared for that.
So
and keep people in a safe setting, and
the ain't nothing wrong with the truth. The truth shall set you free. In a fighter squadron, Doc, if you and I went flying today, we'd get into a debrief room and we'd rip each other to shreds. But before we ripped each other to shreds, you and I both have an opportunity to kind of self-identify. Like, hey, Doc, I was off altitude today, man. I sucked at formation flying and my bomb dropping was awful. What do you have for me? What's that do? That increases your confidence in me. Like, hey, Whiz saw these issues in himself and identified this in the debrief. So if we can do this, self-identify issues in this stuff, it only builds the credibility to mom and pop and the regular Americans. If we start kind of hiding or minimizing stuff that didn't need to be minimized, man, there's risk in everything. I love to tell people the odds of getting killed by a golden retriever are never zero. They're probably pretty small and insignificant, but guess what? They're never
not zero.
They're never zero. So why not be open and honest about these things, which will raise our credibility? I mean, I tell people all the time about my 5-MeO DMT experience. I went into the room and at the Mission Within in Mexico, and a big mattress on the floor and pillows around it. And I'm like, why is a mattress on the floor and why are there pillows around it? Well, guess what? I did a forward flip in the bed, man. It was an exorcism. I went into the medicine facing the Pacific on a beautiful day, and I came out of the medicine facing a wall. So now I know why there was pillows on the floor. So, and I go out of my way to tell people that because, other times I've held space for people doing 5-MeO. They laugh, they giggle, some people cry. I was a flipper, man. And then, Marcus Luttrell went in front of me and he was a get up and he thought a lantern full of light and beauty came out of his soul. So why hide these things? Why not just be open and honest about them? Because it can only help our credibility, The truth can disinfectant, sunlight, sunshine never hurts anything. And people will know this, right? Like we can't hide all these potential negative things because people are going to go, that's bullshit. I just can't believe that it's all these things are sunshine, lollipops, and unicorns. There's got to be tough things. Why hide them,
And there's other aspects that are in the same category, such as not wanting to collect the data that might be used as ammunition against you.
Correct.
Like the credibility of the blind, which I'm guilty of in the past, but try to do a better job now. It's even if it sucks, it's better to know that. And you can do creative things like
correct.
Robin Carhart Harris recently published with his comparison psilocybin to an SSRI. Really creative thing, just measured expectancy for the the particular, that they would get better, and actually found a relationship between expectancy resulting in better results with the SSRI, but not for the psilocybin. So it's
Correct.
a creative way of getting at this kind of placebo expectancy question, even if the credibility of the placebo, the double blind isn't 100%. So so it's, we got, and things like asking people whether they've used again. It's not typical. Like most people that have never used these things before and they're only seeking it for like this medical reason, they're not going to use it again.
Correct.
But it's also true that some people will. Now, it's also not, we're talking about psilocybin, and same thing with MDMA, not a classically addictive drug. It's not like these drugs that people get into daily use habits
not cocaine where you want more of it, but you're addicted maybe to the feeling. Yeah.
Or even not, we get a debate of whether it's addiction or not, but just some level of use.
Correct.
Maybe someone says, hey, I want to use this once every 6 months. And there were certainly, like say, I remember cancer patients, and this comes up in every stage, like, oh, might be nice if I did this once every, 6 months, or,
Yeah.
That's part of reality. We've got to start measuring that and reporting it, because the FDA is thankfully requiring that. But I think it's also just, there's kind of a whole range of questions that we well, let's not ask that because it's going to make the field look bad. But I think we're creating, things are going to be worse if we don't get ahead of these difficult truths.
Correct. Amen.
And explore how to navigate them. Maybe people abuse, but it's not problematic, they haven't gotten harmful. Maybe it is harmful. We want to know that. What can we do to better, to minimize that if that's a goal? What do we do? Just, you can't do anything with it when you leave it in the shadows.
Amen, man. Nothing.
And it's going to happen whether you ignore it or not.
Exactly. Yeah. It's still happening whether you report it or not. And then if you don't, and people find out about it, now you just shot yourself in the foot. So, Doc, absolutely incredible, man. This is exactly what I needed. This is exactly what I wanted. Before we go, I want to thank you for your service, for everything you've done. You've been doing for you're almost going on 20 years here in the psychedelic space. Thank you for blowing the dust off the books. Thank you for putting the ladder down to help save veterans' lives, first responders, their families, and everybody too. Obviously, I ain't nobody special, but if mom and pop are going to look up the veterans or athletes or something like that, you've met Daniel Carcillo. Maybe if us doing this stuff can help change people's minds, the world's going to be a much better place. So my brother, thank you for all this. Thank you for all you're doing. And
thank you for your service. And mutual admiration here, but it's it's humbling.
Yeah.
So sometimes people say it's psychedelic research, just another thing, psychedelics aren't going to save the world. And hopefully it can help. But if we're going to, there's a lot of people doing a lot of really important things that humble me. And it's if you could just if this research is one little part of what we're collectively doing as people, but you've done some real stuff. It's it's cool to do, but I just want to kind of say what you've done, what so many of others have done. We're all doing really including things that require way more courage than what I'm doing. So just to be clear, it's cool to do something that I love, that I have fun doing, and it can help people hopefully. Yeah.
I love it, man. Well, guess what, Doc? One team, one fight. You and I are on the same team and we're on the same fight. So thank you for everything you're doing, my brother. You got an open invitation to come down here to South Florida. I'll throw you back in the No Fallen Heroes Foundation fighter jet, and we'll go up and pull some G's. So,
oh wow,
yeah, it'll be a good time. All right, folks, that was Dr. Matthew Johnson, an incredible human being, 500-pound head. We're probably going to have Doc back on, obviously, as this sector continues to explode, and because I want to pick his brain even more. So, everybody else, have a great rest of your day. Happy hunting. Make sure you're hedged. Fights on. Namaste and Basi Basi. Whiz out.